So in the reptile community, hybrid animals have been a point of contention for many keepers, and I myself used to look at hybrids with disgust, but I've changed my mind, and nowadays I look at hybrids and I generally think they're the future. Now, how could I have changed my mind for having such disdain and disgust towards hybridization of different reptile species, and now think that it's the future? And not only do I think it's the future, but I think it's the inevitable future. I think it's the future whether or not you like it or not. This is my prediction of where reptiles goes in the future. So to start, let's go back to what I used to think about hybrid animals. Now, when I did my degree and I started training to be a zookeeper, I had this image of conservation, and you had this species, and you breed them, and you outcross, and you keep the genetics heterozygous by breeding it outwards and making sure that anything negative was covered. Basically outbreeding and never inbreeding. So I wanted to be, we had this species, and we're basically mini conservationists, mini zookeepers in my mind, who had our own zoos at home, like this room, right? And we were working with our species and the collective conscious that is reptile keeping, that our reptile keepers were basically working in this conservation network like zoos. Obviously, that is far from the case of reality. This isn't how this works, but that was my thinking. And I would look at hybridization as like a affront to that mindset. If you produce a hybrid, then it's of no conservation value, it's ruining things, it's ruining what reptile keeping could be, what it should be in my mind. It was muddying the waters. It meant that if I wanted to say I want to get a pure animal and I went out and it looked pure, if everyone was producing hybrids, then I don't know whether it's pure or not. So it was ruining our ability to produce these pure animals and work with our different species that have conservation value. Right, and I think that's what the majority of reptile keepers think, because it's this idea that's almost been like bred into you as you've learned your steps and, you know, you've got your gold stars and you've learned your way on your journey of reptile keeping. The one thing that I think gets distilled and implanted as dogma into people is hybrids are bad. But on this channel, you might have seen a few recent podcast episodes where we've dived into the topic of line breeding and hybrids and domestication. So we've gone down a little bit of a rabbit hole. And this little rabbit hole that we've gone down has made me do a complete 180 in how I view hybrids. So before I go into my whole spiel, and I think by the end of this video I can convince you of the same mindset. So you'll have to let me know in the comments if by the end I've actually changed your mind. But before we go into that, I just want to say hybrids that are like really extreme, like Burmese python to burn bull, or like bull python to green tree python, or something that have got complete different care requirements, or if something wants a humid environment and something wants an arid environment, and you're putting their care needs at odds of each other, and you don't know how to take care of the hybrid. If anything that causes welfare problems like that for the actual animal and how it's going to function, then I'm not too keen on it. If it's something like a California king snake to a corn snake, or diamond pythons to a Bredl's python or Morelia bredli. Things that are close like that really their form and function remains the same and that animal actually becomes hardier and might actually function better in captivity. That's what I'm thinking. So obviously I'm not talking about some corn snake blood python cross, like I don't think that exists, but that's not my point. But things as simple as like an imperial milk snake, which is a milk snake and a king snake cross. The main talking points on why we look at these ambiguous looking hybrids that might be a MBK cross to a Cali King cross, we look at that and it looks a little bit ambiguous, right? And the argument is, well, I don't know if that's pure or not, and you're going to make some animals that are ambiguously looking, that are going to go out into herpetoculture and be sold from one person and then rescued as a rehome, and then it's listed as just a California king snake when it's actually a California king snake, desert king snake, and then suddenly someone's bought that to breed to their California king snake to produce California king snakes, and then suddenly you end up with our population of California king snakes that aren't actually pure anymore because the lineage and the labeling of what the animal actually is has slipped, and then it's become muddying the waters in our California king snake population. That example, that's really why most people hate hybrids. I've even had comments that have said it's actually like abusive or like exploitative to actually make hybrids. So they have these really, really extreme opinions, and they look at hybrids as something that is extreme. So where my mind has started to shift is where I've seen these areas where things are kind of like blurry, right? So I think, what are the things that people love in herpetoculture? Species, locality, and morphs, right? Cool. So let's take locality. What's the difference between a locality and a hybrid? Well, a locality is meant to be a set of characteristics that are representative of a certain population in a certain environment's needs, and that environment has crafted that animal to make the perfect set of characteristics that aid in that animal's survival, right? So you can go to that area and know that this animal in captivity represents this area in the wild, and people love that, and they love the idea of keeping like these different lines of locality, and I've got this one and this one and this one, and I've got the collection, I've got the set, and they are all pure, they're all direct lineage back to location, and what I've got are really, really expensive, rare, or I just like it, right? So the idea is that is very linear, it's very pure, it's still the same species, and it's representative of a certain thing. And then hybrids are this ambiguous mix mash, like mutt. If you take equivalent of like dogs to reptiles, it would be a mutt, right? That's the mindset. However, when I start thinking about locality, it doesn't make sense to me. In my mind, locality doesn't exist. Now let me explain that to you. Localities of reptiles and characteristics of certain subpopulations in the wild absolutely do exist. But when you take that animal from the wild into captivity, what you're getting is a drift from the characteristics from what you've taken and what's in the wild, right? And what do people do when they want to work with a locality? They want the nice animals of that represented characteristics. So let's say something like a Okatee corn snake, right? They might be from the same field they collect from, but they're going to take the nicest looking ones, right, to start their line from. Because why have ugly looking localities? Or jungle carpet pythons is the perfect example. Those clean yellow and black bands. But in the wild, they're really muddy and creamy and not really yellow at all. So there's a disparity between the good ones and the ones people deem as meh. So as soon as you take those nice looking ones into captivity and start breeding from them, what you're doing is proliferating in a certain direction of that thing that you like, of that set of characteristics. But eventually down the line, what we end up with is a subpopulation, a line of characteristics in this basket that we like that is nowhere near representative of what's in the wild anymore. Those pressures in the wild that make that population and that locality what it is, as soon as you start breeding a line in captivity, it doesn't matter what you do, you end up with it not being a locality anymore, but actually just a basket of a certain characteristics you like. Because naturally, subconsciously, whether you like it or not, you're going to drift in colour because you want pretty ones. You're going to drift in behaviour because you want the ones that aren't an arsehole and aren't going to bite you, right? You're going to want the ones that feed better and they just take rodents because that's what we have in a ready supply. Not the ones that want to start on lizards and be a pain in the butt, right? All these different things, the ones that are bold and come out and say hello. All these different things that subconsciously you're breeding for, whether you like it or not. I mean, like feeding. If it won't eat a lizard, or it won't eat a rodent and it wants a lizard, and if it dies, automatically you've taken that out of the gene pool. And the ones that proliferate and carry on, if they're taking rodents, you're already leaning it in this direction of these rodent-eating, bold, friendly, really bright, colourful, vibrant animals. There is no way that you can keep a locality actually a locality unless you've got gene transfer from the wild population to your captive population, because those selective pressures that make the locality what it is are missing in here, in our captive population. So it doesn't matter what you do, your locality is basically just a grouping of characteristics that you like that you've labelled. It's no different from a line of pied ball pythons, right? A morph. What is a morph? A grouping of a set of characteristics that we like, that we put in this basket and we breed and proliferate these characteristics. And what our captive locality has become is exactly the same. A group of characteristics that we like. On a very, very rare circumstance where the conservationists ever go to someone like me and be like, oh, I want some of your locality animals to reintroduce back into the wild. Well, these animals eat a highly rodent diet. The babies are no longer geared towards lizards in the start, which is what the wild population needs. They're actually completely different. They're behaviourally really bold. So if they go out into the wild and their boldness makes them take risks, and then a hawk snatches them, basically their behavioural profile, their colour profile, their dietary profile, everything about this locality has drifted so much, these are of less value than what they would be conservation-wise worthwhile. So what they would do is a conservation would take stuff from the wild, breed their own captive population, and then work between gene transfer from this population and the wild. Our locality stuff has drifted so far into what we want it to be, there's of very little value. What I realise is that I'm not doing anything for conservation. Most of us aren't. There are very few people that are doing true conservation. What we're doing is breeding pets for pet's sake. And when you realise that, there is no difference between the locality, this bucket of characteristics that we like, the morph, this bucket of characteristics that we like, and hybrids. What is a hybrid? A bucket of characteristics that we like. So then I say to myself, okay, so what's the difference between an imperial milk snake, which is the hybrid, right? It's a made up thing of king snake to milk snake. But what will end up happening is people breed imperials to imperials, and then so far down the line breeding imperial to imperial, there is its own bucket now, right? It's no longer just like F1 crosses that are 50-50%. It's its own bucket. It's essentially becoming a breed, right? What's the difference between this imperial bucket and this Miami bucket? Because the Miami's corn snakes in captivity aren't representative of what's in the wild. They're just a bucket. In actuality, what might actually be happening is the Miami locality stuff in the UK, for example, might not even have direct lineage back to animals that came from a capture from that Miami locality. And actually there were like morph projects that actually the animal you've got is actually just a phenotype that looks like the bucket that you identify as Miami, but it's actually just a generic corn snake that kind of looks like a Miami. It's not this like pure pristine pedigree lineage back to the wild. And unless you seek that out and look for that for certain breeders, and you look for those, and you look for that lineage, and you look for that paperwork, you don't know. So really what we have is everything in captivity, unless it's like recently brought in from the wild, or it's got a constant gene transfer from the wild to captivity, is a hobby form of what's in the wild. We've got hobby form animals in the same way in tarantulas. There is curly hairs in the wild, there's a Nicaraguan curly hair, and there's the hobby form. But what people don't realise is all of our corn snakes and bearded dragons and bull pythons and stuff, they are hobby form versions of what's in the wild. They are avatars. They are avatars of the characteristics that we think that's a corn snake. And that leads me to my next line of thinking that has taken me down this rabbit hole, and is, are any of our hobby form species actually pure? Can you guarantee that that California king snake is a 100% California king snake? Can you be sure that that corn snake over there is 100% corn snake? I know for a fact, a bloody fact, that our corn snakes in the UK are not 100%. Back in the day, black rat snake got mixed in, things like tessera corn snake. Tessera came from a California king snake, and that's been bred into corn snakes. There are loads of different examples of corn snakes that are probably not pure. And in reality, these corn snakes that we keep in our hobby, that we love and cherish, and we've got different lines of, different sizes, different colours. Do you care whether it's 95% corn snake or 100% corn snake if it looks, acts, tastes, smells like a corn snake? For all intensive purposes, to our hobby for producing pets for pet snake, and we have hobby form varieties, avatars of what's in the wild anyway, does it matter? If it's a corn snake to us, is it not a corn snake? For example, would I be upset if my jet black MBKs with not a speck on them were actually got some California king snake in them? Does that mean that they're no less of the bucket of characteristics that I enjoy, that I identify with being what I want from a Mexican black king snake? Not really. And does it matter? This MBK, let's say it's 97% MBK and 3% California king snake. And let's say all of our MBKs in captivity are like that. Do we care? If it's jet black, acts like an MBK, looks like an MBK, and bites like an MBK, is it not an MBK to us? Because it's our avatar of what's in the wild anyway, right? But let's take that thinking a step further, right? Let's say you want to go for, I know the exact lineage and I've got a paper trail back to the ones that were collected from the wild. And let's say we've got corn snakes, right? I'm using corn snakes as an example again. Let's say I've got pure locality of X, Y, Z, and I know it came from this, this, and this, and this GPS coordinates from this guy that collected, and my line is pure, right? Let's say you're thinking like that. Absolutely fine. But we know between different boundaries of different species, we have intergrade zones. And actually, in terms of the species concept, the definition of a species is a set of characteristics that proliferate in a species and that they can't actually produce viable offspring with a different animal, right? But that definition is busted out the water when we look at snakes and the intergrade zones and the hybrids, and actually look at king snakes. It's actually just a gradient of different king snakes from species integrate, species integrate, species integrate. It's just a gradient of species. So there's no longer just these like bucket, bucket, bucket. There's no hard lines. It's a gradient along the gradient, right? So my point is, how do you know that animal was pure? For example, let's say you've got rat snake, generic rat snake 1 here, intergrade, corn snake, right? And let's say in books and our knowledge of where the boundary of pure and intergrade ends is here. And let's say your animal was taken here. So it's within the boundaries of pure, but going inwards. How do you know that there isn't still a soft gradient from there to there, and it's not actually like 80% corn snake? Because there are some hybrids that are 80% but still express the scalation, the looks, the pattern, the morphology of a corn snake, but it's actually still 80%. So how would you know? No one's actually going out to the wild and being like, oh, I'm doing a DNA test on this. What they'll do is they'll look at their field guides, they're within the bounds of the species that they want to collect, looks like a corn snake, scalations, morphology, everything about it, to the person, corn snake. Cool. Collect that, breed from it. But you don't know. You don't know that it's not 80%. You don't know that it's not 95%. You don't know that it's not 97 or 98%. So you can actually test things, and I'm sure that someone can go into a lab and test for like, is it pure? And then start looking at like haplotypes and blah, 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 blah. But in terms of the hobby and what we've got, and it's just a generic bloke that's gone out, wandered out and collected and then starts breeding and selling, you don't bloody know. No one knows. So even that shit where you're like, this is my locality, this is pure, I got the GPS coordinates, you still don't bloody know that it's 100% corn snake. You do not know. Look at palmetto corn snakes. Now that animal was a male that was found in the wild, but it was found in an area where there was other rat snakes, there was 2 other rat snake species, and corn snakes overlapped in this area. But when they collected it, they were like the scalation, the morphology, everything about it says corn snake. So it was assumed that it was a corn snake. Right? Okay, cool. No DNA testing, you don't know. It could be bloody 80%, or it could be 99%, it could be 100%. But you don't know that recessive palmetto stuff is actually originating in 100% corn snake. It could have gone from this other generic rat snake, blah, 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 into those 80% corn snakes. You've collected that 80%, you've gone off, and everyone's breeding from those palmettos into corn snakes. And now every single thing that's gone into corn snakes, whether it's tessera, whether it's palmetto, you don't know. So the majority of corn snakes, unless you're like dead center in corn snake territory and you collect it from the wild, then you're probably thinking, yeah, it's probably a corn snake, probably 100% corn snake, dead center in the range. But do many of us know where each morph started from? What locality and blah, 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 blah? You don't know. So effectively, that's my point. We don't know the purity of anything in captivity. And then back to my point, do we really care? What is healthier? An animal that has been bred outwardly to loads of different things. It's probably got a bit of Cali in it. It's probably got a bit of other rat snake in it. It's got a bit of hybrid vigor in there versus this locality of corn snake, this bucket that you want, but you won't go outside of that bucket because you think that bucket of characteristics is pure, even you have no way of knowing, and you're inbreeding because, you can't go out of it, otherwise that would ruin the locality. That would water down the locality. So you're actually inbreeding and you're getting recessive deleterious alleles to express, and you're ruining the health of this population, or at least declining it, compared to this one that you look at and you're like, it's a mutt, it's disgusting, but it's got the hybrid vigor, and this population is healthier, it eats better, it grows better, everything about it is better, apart from this, I want to collect, I want my bucket mentality. And as soon as we let go of this bucket mentality, this locality stuff doesn't matter to me. And I don't think there's anything wrong with it. It's fun, but I think that's what we're doing. These buckets and what we want to do, we're basically producing captive breeds. Characteristics that we proliferate in a line, it's a breed. It's no longer, it's this locality from blah, 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 blah. It's an avatar of what the world is actually like. They aren't representative. There's no gene transfer. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's actually adjacent from the avatar that it's trying to represent. So at the end of the day, it's not conservation value. It's pets for pet's sake. So what we're doing is just fun. So what's the danger of the hybrids? Well, the only thing that's going to happen is you might ruin someone else's fun in the way that they want to run their hobby and the buckets that they want to collect in their hobby. Because the mindset is, I want to go into a reptile shop and I want to know that that animal is 100% pure and I can just collect it and breed it with my animals, and I'm producing pure Burmese pythons or pure this or that. But you don't know that animal's pure. And if you're that obsessed with your idea of purity, you should be going through the steps of who's the breeder, who's the lineage, who's the sire of this, find the paper trail back of the line, back to what you think, or make sure it stays within the bounds of what you consider to be pure. And if you're not doing that and you just want anything that you grab out of thin air to be pure in your mind because someone over there is producing hybrids, then that's just entitlement. People that are doing hybrids, they want this characteristics, they want this bloodstock, they want imperials to look like this. They're looking for the right animals to bring into their breeding projects. They're putting the effort in theory. I know some people are just mixing things everywhere. But if you want to do a solid breeding program and not just pairing random things, then you have to look for the right individuals anyway. And if you're not doing that, and you're just hoping that things are going to be pure, it's not pure anyway. So what Billy Bob over here breeding hybrids is doing on the other end of the country, not really ruining what you're trying to do, because you're not even putting in the effort to make sure that the boundaries of the characteristics you're trying to breed are actually there anyway, because you'll just pick up random animals. So all of it is manageable and you can create breeds if you want to. It's just no one's really thinking about it because they're in this dogma of it has to be this bucket, it has to be this species, it has to be this locality, because that's what I've been told, that's what I've been told. No, it has to be blah, 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 blah. It's conservation, I'm a conservationist. It's just weird, cosplaying as this conservationist zookeeper when you're just a pet keeper. And there's nothing wrong with that. Being a pet keeper and keeping exotic pets is cool as fuck. You don't need to be this cosplay of I'm a scientist, I'm this, I'm that. Let it go. And that's the thing that's happened to me over the course of a year, is all this dogma and things that come from conservation and this, I was going to be a zookeeper, so I have to be this weird mindset when I do this. Let it go. I've let it go, and I'm looking at things now and I'm like, I want to do some cool hybrid things. And honestly, it just makes it so much more fun. Our UK population of Eastern Indigos is so inbred, they have exploding hearts and they die really early. They're basically having really extreme health problems from severe inbreeding. But we can't get any more from the wild because they're protected, right? So what do you do with this? Do you continue to inbreed because you're proliferating these pure animals that have got health problems? Or do you take something like a Texas Indigo, bring that in, get some bit of hybrid vigor coming out and breed out and cut out and cull all the health problems and make this ambiguous avatar indigo for the hobby, but they're lovely, healthy, robust animals that have long longevity, that eat really well, breed really well, they're not dying. And then what you can do is then breed for that red chin to make it look like that anyway, but it's just this avatar, vague breed for captivity in the UK hobby versus this one, which is, they are pure, but they're all fucking kicking the bucket and they're dying anyway, right? So what would you as a pet keeper rather buy if it looks like an Eastern Indigo, acts like an Eastern Indigo, and you get the enjoyment of it being an Eastern Indigo, but it's got hybrid vigor and it's like 97, 95, 80% Eastern Indigo, but it's healthy and it doesn't die, or you can buy the one that is inbred to shit and is gonna croak it. And that's an extreme example, but bringing in hybridization, hybrid vigor into things like that would solve problems. And that leads me into why I think that it's the future of reptile keeping anyway. Because if you look at the way that things are going to go, we're going to get positive lists, we're going to get like reductions of what we keep. It's already happening, right? Places in Europe, places, states in the US, what you can and can't keep, what's banned. We're probably going to end up with a set of animals that we're allowed to keep in a positive list, and it's probably going to be really, really reduced. So when you can only keep corn snakes, bearded dragons, crested geckos, the usual common stuff, what do you think is going to happen when people are craving the rarity or the variety that they want to take things in a different direction? So they're doing something different and explore what we can do within these tiny constraints of what's left. It's going to be morphs. People are going to love morphs. It's going to be locality. People are going to like locality. Again, just buckets of characteristics, but also hybrids that are new breeds that don't exist in the wild, that are like a milk snake, corn snake. An imperial could be a new breed that's so far removed from F1 crosses and it's so far down the line that an imperial is its own characteristics, its own thing. It's got a breed standard. We start working in a way where we have these new animals that are pets, that are bred for pet's sake, that are what we want. They make better pets, they're hardier, they're outgoing, they can take extreme temperature variations, they're really forgiving of beginner mistakes, really easy to breed, really easy to get the babies going. Everything about it is the perfect pet, and it's bloody beautiful. That is just what's going to happen. I think it's inevitable that people are going to go that direction and start making domestic breeds of reptiles, because that's the new frontier. That's all you can really go to that's new and exciting, because you can't get new species in. That's locked. That door is behind you. Now you have to create new things if you want new things. And I think that's the way things are going to go anyway. And I think it's inevitable. We had someone on the podcast last week when he was talking about, well, he's got a line of Honduran milk snakes. Ones get really big and another line stays really small and breeds at a really small size. And they stay small. The entire line stays small. So now you've basically got one species, but you've got the Great Danes and the Chihuahuas. So we can basically go in a direction that dogs and every other culture, aviculture, aquaculture, dogs, you get it. We're the last ones. Birds, you've got breeds of different pigeons with like hairdos and different canaries, and goldfish with the ranchus and the different goldfish and the big like fluffy like bulbous heads, and different breeds of guppies, and all these different things that naturally are going to occur. We're going to go in the same direction. As every other culture has aged and become older and older and older, hybrids and breeding for breeds is going to occur. Now, every other domestic breed that we have, whether it's dogs, whether it's cattle, pigs, sheep, it's never just from we've got a wild ancestor to our domestic breed. There are several different species that went into making hybrids and then years and years later become our domestic breed. There are several different species of pigs that go into the pig we got now. Several different cattle that got the cattle that we got now. Dogs didn't come from one species of wolf. The whole point is Hybrids are an integral part of domestication and producing domestic species and breeds that come off of that. So I think it's natural. It's natural that hybrids are going to happen because it's what humans do. It's what we do. We learn how to keep something, breed it, selectively breed, and then domesticate it. And a part of that is hybrids. And I think that's the inevitable future of herpetoculture. So I've gone from that's disgusting, why would you ever do that, to actually this is probably the new frontier and there's a glass ceiling of what we think is left to do in herpetoculture, and actually there's this vast chasm beyond that no one even has stepped foot into yet, or at least very few have. And I think that's where we're going.